Well, good morning. It's good to be back up here. I haven't been up here for a while, and part of it I was gone for a wedding. My oldest son got married 2 weeks ago tomorrow, so that was a big deal. Everybody says congratulations. I'm not sure why you're congratulating me. It wasn't like he was living at home in my basement. You know, he was a fully self-supporting, self-functioning young man. But it's nice to have a new addition to our family, another daughter. I have two daughter-in-laws. I got daughters the easy way, right? So that's a great thing. But hey, it's great to be with you. And we're actually going to kick off a brand new, very short message series, a two-parter. And it's going to become more evident, if it's not this week, at least next week, why it's only two parts, because you could only handle two parts, all right? Because I'm going to say something to you, and I just want you to sit there for a moment and feel the impact of these words. You ready? We need to talk. And everybody, when they hear those words, there's something that just kind of goes, oh no, right? We kind of get a little fearful. We kind of hope we're not sort of trapped in a room alone where it's like, sit down, we need to talk. We hope they say we need to talk while you're on the phone, while you're texting, and you say, oh man, yes, but I'm just so busy right now. Can we wait till next week, you know? And then you hope next week you have something else to do, right? When your boss says that, you know, emails you and says, hey, we need to talk, and you say, oh, well, I'd love to, but, you know, got a meeting with Bob the accountant today, because every accountant's name is Bob, right? I got a meeting with Bob the accountant today, or, you know, I'm working on this project, the one you really want me to get, and I really got to get that done. And, you know, we run away from having those talks because we're just never sure where they're going to go. Or we're afraid they're going to ask us about something that we're not quite ready to talk about, right? Not ready to quite take that step in this relationship. Not quite ready to face maybe the things that we should have done a little better. And something happens. In fact, I wrote it on your outline. When you don't hear because you don't want to know, and how many of you have not heard something because you didn't want to know? Anybody else honest out there today, right? Right? You know, if you have a significant other, you know, if you're a kid, you know, you're playing outside and your mom says, time to come in, and you don't really want to come in, you know what you tell her when you get home, right? Oh, I didn't hear, I was down the street, I didn't hear you, right? And I know, guys, we do this sometimes, right? You're out, you know, you're working in the basement maybe, and you can hear your wife say something, but you really don't want to respond at that moment, right? And maybe it's that moment in the game tomorrow, you know, last drive to win the game, and she says, honey, and you're like, So you'd be like, I can't quite hear you, or I'm busy right now, or I'll get to you in a minute, right? We can't put, but when you don't hear because you don't want to know, sometimes someone has to do something to get your attention. And we've all had somebody do something to get our attention, and it wasn't just because they were doing something, they were just doing it to get our attention. In fact, today's story comes from the life of Jesus, and it's a moment, a very crucial moment in Jesus' life, when he gets to the place where he has to get his disciples' attention. And he's been trying over and over and over again. And in this moment, he does something in order to make them so uncomfortable that they cannot miss what he was trying to get their attention for. So before we jump into there today, as we kick off this series, I invite you to bow your heads. And let's pray one more time together, okay? Father, you know that all of us at times need to have some discussions that we really don't want to have. And sometimes it's because we're afraid of how they might go. Sometimes it's afraid we might say something wrong. Sometimes we're just not sure what our answers might be, if we're ready to make that step or to do that thing. But today, my simple prayer for myself and for us that are gathered here today is that you would speak to us in a way that nobody else can speak to us. And that we'll hear you in a way that we don't listen and hear anybody else. And I pray that this act that Jesus did in order to get his followers, his closest followers' attention, would not go past by us, or that we wouldn't ignore it, but we would again hear how much you care about us and how much you have chosen us for a very specific reason. So we give you this time and this space now to do what only you can do. And we thank you for that now in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. We're going to look at the story. The story is found over in the book of John, the 13th chapter of John. John, as he sets this up, simply writes these words: "It was almost time for the Passover feast." Now, this is not the first Passover that Jesus has spent with his disciples. This is probably the third, maybe even the fourth one that he's gone through. But this one's different from all the other ones. This is the one that if you have some Christian background, you understand. This is the one that we do this thing. In our church, we do it about 4 times a year, this thing called the Lord's Supper, the communion. This is when Jesus enacts that. If you're a Catholic, you know, the whole idea of the Eucharist, this is where it comes from. This is that moment when Jesus switches this traditional old reminder of what God did so far back in Egypt and brings it now to what God is doing in their lives in that moment. But John simply says, it was almost time for the Passover feast. And then he tells us an insight that he saw, he heard, he describes in the very next word when he says, Jesus knew. He knew that it was time for him to leave, that is, depart from this world, and it was time to go back to the Father. Jesus knew that it's almost at this moment of time, something just clicks for Jesus. And in that moment, sort of an epiphany, he recognizes this is it. All this time, these last 3+ years that I've been building up to this is the moment. This is the moment when I'm going to leave this world. And he knows to leave this world is not just simply he's getting on a plane or a spaceship and leaving, he's going to die. But it all falls him at this moment. In fact, John will write later that he also recognizes at this moment that God has literally put everything into his hands. And it dawns on Jesus in a way it hasn't dawned before that he is not only the most powerful person in that room that night, but that he is the most powerful person, period. And John just says that Jesus had always loved those who were his own in this world, that he'd always loved the disciples. And he loved them all the way to the end. He loved them completely and totally. And there's this idea that if you want to know what Jesus meant when he said, love one another, we ought to look at what Jesus did. You always ought to look at what somebody does more than just simply what they say, right? In order to understand, and this is a great principle, as you read your Bible, as you go kind of read through, especially the New Testament, when Jesus says something, you think, boy, what does that really mean? Look at what Jesus did with that. Look at how he interacted with people. Look at the things that he did and to help us understand. And so this moment, to understand what he meant when he talked about loving one another, John will say, we're going to see what he did. So, John says, it was during the meal. They're already eating. They're already going through this great Passover meal. We don't know exactly what stage, but at some point they've already been eating. Jesus stands up, and he takes off his outer clothing, and that's important not simply because he's just taking off a jacket or a sweater he had on to keep warm. This was a symbol that Jesus wore a rabbi's jacket. This is one of those moments when Jesus did what everybody else who was a rabbi did. They wore a certain kind of coat that symbolizes they walk into town and people say, oh, that must be a rabbi because the way they're dressed. And when Jesus takes off this jacket, he's symbolizing, I'm the rabbi, but at this moment I'm taking off that position, that power, that representation, and putting it aside for a moment. And then he pours this water into this bowl, and he begins to wash the followers, that is, disciples' feet. And as John goes on, he'll say that he begins to work around the room. And you have to imagine the room is silent right now, right? They're having dinner. And you all know how Thanksgiving dinner goes, right? Everybody's having a good time. You're talking all of a sudden. And if somebody, whoever sort of is at the head of your family, whether it's a mother, a father, a grandmother, or a grandfather, whoever sort of has that representation, if they got up in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner, took off their sweater, took off their shirt, got down to, maybe it's your dad, and he's in his, those little, I don't know what they call them, wife beaters, what I've always called them. I know that's not a right term in a church, but you know what I mean, that kind of shirt. That's not a approving statement, that's just the only word I've ever known them by. Those kind of shirts, right? We all got the picture. If he was to get down to that and begin to wash people's feet around the table, you know that everybody at the table would just go, oh, this is weird. This is different. And it is. It's kind of weird. It's kind of different. And he begins to work himself around. And if you're familiar with the story, he gets to Peter, who looks at Jesus, looks down at Jesus as he's brought the bowl there and he begins to wash them. And he says, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Which is a really dumb statement to make at this time, isn't it? Because it said he's already washed at least one, if not more, of the disciples' feet. He gets to him and he's like, really going to wash my feet? No, Peter, I'm just sitting down here for no good reason. I mean, come on, Peter. To which Jesus says, you don't understand now what I'm doing, but you will understand later. Maybe a better translation is simply, Peter, don't fight me on this. Just let me do this. Because Peter will answer, oh, no. You're not going to wash my feet, not me. To which Jesus says, Peter, if I don't, then you're not connected. We're not connected. I have to do this. To which Peter says, oh, throw water all over the top, throw it all over the top. Which, by the way, Peter would have been a hard guy to be married to. He would have been a hard guy to be around for very long. But here's the crazy thing. Jesus picked Peter. And he didn't just pick him because he was the last guy available. It wasn't like, you take him, I take him, we're down to Peter. Peter, come on, That wasn't. Peter was his first pick because here's the great thing I don't want you to miss. Everybody who Jesus invites to follow them is his first pick. Even you. There are no second picks. There are no last picks. None of you is the, oh, well, I'll take so-and-so. You play out in right field and you just, no, farther. Keep going. Keep going. But Jesus says, Peter, don't fight me. You don't really understand now, but in a little while, it's gonna make sense to you. So Jesus washes his feet. He finishes washing whoever else's feet is left over. Nobody is talking at this moment because it just has caught them so much off guard. I mean, there has to be at some point, some of them think, oh man, we should have thought of this. We should have had somebody come and wash feet because it was sort of a tradition to have somebody, a servant come and wash feet. In fact, in some circles they said it wasn't even a Jewish servant. You had to have a Gentile servant because it was such a low job. So maybe someone thought, oh, when I saw him do it, I should have got up. And they're all just kind of going through all these ideas. All these thoughts are racing through their minds. And it races through our minds, doesn't it? In those moments when somebody says we need to have a talk and we're going, oh, where's this going to go? What's it going to mean? And their heads are racing just like our heads race in those moments. And then John says, when Jesus has finished washing their feet, he puts on his clothes again. So he gets that rabbi's jacket. He takes that roll again. He puts it on, and he sits down again. And then he says to the group, do you understand what I have done to you? Do you understand what I've done for you? To which I love what John remembers, because John does not remember Peter raising his hand going, ooh, Jesus, I got this. Nobody says a word because they've been reminded one more time that so often they don't have a clue what Jesus was talking about. Which I don't know about you, but for me that's very comforting because there are some things I read that Jesus wrote that I go, I'm not really clear on. And I got a great education. I have 7 years to do what I do, college and graduate school. And sometimes I run into stuff and I go, I got no idea. Which is comforting to know that the people that spent every day of their lives for 3+ years were so often unclear on what Jesus meant to do. So Jesus, as he so normally does, he begins to explain it to them. He says, guys, you call me teacher. You call me Lord. And you're right to do that. I am a teacher. I am a rabbi. I'm someone who's there to not just give directions, but to give wisdom, to give understanding, to give you some stuff, to principles to live out your life. And I'm Lord. I'm the one. I am the most influential, the most important person, not just only in this room or not just only in your lives, but I'm it. Now, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash each other's feet. So sometimes we make the conclusion, oh, that means Jesus wants me to wash feet. But he says, I did this as an example, as a pattern, so that you should do as I have done for you. And if we think this is simply about washing feet, we have missed Jesus' point. And that's not to say that we shouldn't wash people's feet. In fact, our faith tradition has this thing that when we have communion, we have the Lord's Supper, we have this opportunity for people to wash feet because we recognize there's something powerful about getting down on your knees in front of somebody and washing their feet. And there's something powerful about sitting in a chair and having somebody wash your feet. It's uncomfortable. It catches us off guard. It's like those moments when somebody says, we need to talk, and we go, I don't know what to do. Where's the nearest door? And when somebody's washing your feet, in fact, I think having somebody wash your feet is more uncomfortable than washing somebody's feet. Because if I'm washing your feet, I got something to do, right? If I'm sitting there, I got nothing to do but to sit there and watch you wash my feet. It's important, but it is not just about washing feet. Jesus is making such a huge point, such a much bigger point. In fact, he says, listen, I will tell you the truth. A servant is not greater than his master. And I notice nobody taking out their phone today and taking a picture of that slide. Because how you recognize that's true, the disciples recognize it. That wasn't new news to them. They're like, well, yeah, of course. But Jesus is saying, don't miss the power of what that means. I'm not just talking about masters and servants. I'm talking about master and servants. If you know these things, and he's not saying, I don't know if you know these. His statement here is simply about, you have seen this. You've seen this not just tonight, but that you have seen this in the past 3+ years. You have observed this. You know these things, and I just want to encourage you, because you know these things, you've seen them, you've understood how they've worked, you will be blessed. You'll be blessed by God, and you'll be blessed internally with a sense of, yes, this works this way. That you'll be blessed if you do them. And as Jesus wraps this up, and the story goes on in just a few hours, he will be arrested, he'll be tried, he'll be crucified. John, as he remembers this, says this was the moment when Jesus showed his closest followers the fullest extent of his love. And that he was willing to get down and wash their feet. And the question I think he is after, it's a question every follower of Jesus must ask, and that's simply this: am I greater than Jesus? Or maybe a better way to put it, because that's the question Jesus was asking his followers that night. You call me Lord, call me teacher, And if I'm good enough to take off those robes and to get down and wash somebody's feet, are you good enough to take that same step? Now, that would be a great way to finish the sermon and to make a big appeal, but the reality is that isn't where the story ended that night. In fact, the story got worse. And it got worse than simply that Jesus was going to get arrested and tried and crucified. It got worse because Luke, as he remembers this story, adds this, that after supper, remember Jesus got up and washed the feet during supper. Luke will say after supper, Jesus took the cup, and in the Passover meal, there's multiple times when the wine is drunk, when this cup is taken and the statements are said, and so this is most likely the last of the multiple steps here. But he takes the cup, and Jesus says, this cup that is poured out is the new agreement, the covenant that begins with, that's established my blood, that he begins this idea of changing and transforming this Passover from just a looking back, but also now to a looking what he's going to do. But one of you, he says, is against me. One of you is going to betray me, which causes the disciples to begin to ask each other, who is it? Not going to be me. Trust me, it's not me. You? 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 Who do you think it is? They begin to talk each other, gang up, because that's always what groups do, right? You and I are together. Hey, I think it's these ones on this side, right? Right side people think it's all the left side people. Left side people think it's all the right side people. And then it gets even worse. Because Luke, as he's heard this story and as he puts it all together, says, then the apostles asked each other which one of them would do that, who would betray him. And the apostles began to argue about which one of them was the, say those two words, that is the greatest. Can you believe that? Jesus has got down, washed their feet, right? He has been clear. You don't understand, but you're going to understand. If I, then you, right? If I'm willing to get down and wash feet, then you ought to, right? Even Peter has no words. So clearly something has gotten through to the whole group. And yet, at some minutes later, they begin to argue about which one of them is going to be the greatest. Do you know how that must have made Jesus feel? I mean, he has to be like, really? Really, guys? After all the stuff, after tonight, you're going to ask the question, which one of you is the greatest? So Jesus gives it one final shot. Literally, this is the last shot. This is the last time he will have this conversation with his guys. And it's a reminder that our hunger for power, prestige, and place dies hard. And it's in all of us. And it bleeds through them because it just can't get away. Because all of us, let's face it, long for the day when we can sit down and not be the one doing all the hard work. We want to be the one doing all the easy work. We want the corner office. We want that name behind our name, the title. We want to walk in and know that somebody has put our coffee or our tea or our hot chocolate in a pastry at our desk without us even asking. We'd love to walk out and have a car pick us up and take us home so we don't have to deal with all the craziness. All of us would love to be in that. And it's wired into all of us. And it's something that dies hard in all of us. So Jesus says to them, guys, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them. If you've ever heard that term, lord it over, this is where it comes from. And we all know what that experience is like, right? How many of you have ever had somebody above you lord it over you? Do not raise your hand if they're in the room today, all right? Anybody else there with me? Right? And sometimes they lord it way over the top, right? And Jesus says, listen, you guys know what this experience is like. You've seen it. Some of you have experienced it. But you must not be like that. Don't use it like everybody else you've seen uses it. Now, Jesus is not arguing against having power, prestige, a place. He's not arguing about you should never be the leader, the owner, the director of anything. He's just saying that if and when you get there, you need to be careful. You need to watch how you do all those things. Don't be like them, because you know how it felt to be on the bottom side of them. So don't use it like everybody else you've seen uses it. Use you for more than you. Don't be like them, be like me, he says. Which is kind of the whole point of what he was trying to get to that night. And then Luke says, Jesus wraps it up this way, that normally, guys, you all know this, normally the master sits at the table and is served by the servants. That's how it normally works. And all of us want to be the master sitting at the table. Nobody wants to be the servant. But not here. Not here, Jesus says. For I am your servant. And when Jesus says those words, it is impossible to disconnect from what John says that Jesus said that night. Because what if that's not only true for Jesus, what if that's also true for God? And sometimes we talk about, I'm serving God by doing this, I'm serving God by doing that. Is God ever serving you in any way? What if this is not just a one-time act by Jesus to try to get this point, then go back to heaven and be back in charge, not to deal with all this stuff? Because there's lots of us that love no longer being in those spots where we have to deal with all that stuff. We'd rather be out here. That's what Jesus was trying to communicate that night. And I think it's what he still tries to communicate to us today. That this is what people like us do. And it's because what people like us do, because we have a Savior, we have a Master, we have a Lord, we have a teacher who, that's what he did. And if it wasn't too good for Jesus, it really can't be too good for me. See, every time I serve, it's a reminder that someone or something is more important than me. Now, the good thing of me not talking last week was that I was around the church building. So I popped into kids care for a little bit. I popped into kids church. Actually taught a little lesson in there for the kids. And I watch people who understand this. That every time they serve, it's a reminder that someone or something is more important than me. That at that moment when that the little child is crying because they miss their mommy and they're holding them and trying to distract their attention, trying to give those mommies that are in this room a little bit longer break, right? They're just trying to give you a couple of more minutes. They recognize at the moment it's not about, am I going to get a cold because this little kid's stuff's coming out of eyes and noses and all that stuff. So right now, she is the most important thing. That as you sit in a Sabbath school class and, the kid raises their hand because they're a middle school, and if you read those phase guides that Pastor Marilyn talked about last week, kids at that age love corny jokes, right? And as they have teacher, and they tell this corny joke that just is really corny, that at that moment, it's not time to say, we don't do it like that. It's just simply to recognize what you have. At this moment, it's this child and where that child's at in their development and their stage and their needs. And at that moment, they're the most important thing. And it's really a constant reminder that it's not about me. And it's not about you, and it's not really about us. It's about the one that we're serving. So what do you do when you are the most powerful person in the room? Because Jesus was that evening. And Jesus himself would answer that question. What do you do when you're the most powerful person in the room? He would say, Jesus says, anything. He would say, everything. And he would say, and that thing. Because let's be honest, all of us have a that thing, right? I'll do anything you want, I'll do everything you want, but I won't do that thing, right? And Jesus would say, I think you missed the point. Because washing feet, I mean, it's not a big deal to wash your feet. If I was to say, hey, Hurley, come on up and I'll wash your feet, I'm pretty sure Hurley has taken a shower sometime in the last week at least, all right? Probably within the last 24 hours, I'm hopeful, but at least the last week, right? When Jesus knelt down in front of the disciples, he was pretty sure the last time these guys had had a bath, they probably couldn't remember the last time they had a bath. And they happened to wear sandals. That is if they were wealthy enough to have sandals. Otherwise, it was just their feet. They didn't have cars. They didn't have buses. They didn't have airplanes. They had feet to walk from here to there to everywhere. And it wasn't just nice grassy roads. It wasn't asphalt roads. It was dirty roads. Dirty roads that also, by the way, horses and donkeys had walked along. And you all know what happens when horses and donkeys walk along, right? And then the rains come. And there's a mixing of the elements. But you got to get from here to there, so you walk along those muddy roads. And on that evening, as Jesus kneels down in front of the disciples, he says, when you're the most powerful person in the room, what you need to do is anything, everything, and even that thing. Because nothing was beneath Jesus. Because what Jesus was after was you, and you, and you, and you, and you. And he was willing to go to any height or any depth to do what needed to be done. To remind his closest followers that that's what people like us do. Whether you're the most powerful person in the room or whether you're not. See, in those moments when you think you're somebody, or in those moments when you think you're something, you know, when they've handed you the keys, when they've given you the corner office, when you finally got that promotion, you finally have it all just right. It's in those moments that Jesus wants you and me to remember that nothing is beneath you. And it can't be. Because nothing was beneath Jesus. See, perhaps the clearest picture of who we are is what we do when we have power, authority, and influence. Because all of us have met somebody who has all those things, and they're just the nicest person in the world, right? And all of us have met somebody who didn't have those things but now has those things. Whew, right? And that's when we get the clearest glimpse. Because it's not just about having those things, it's really about who we are in those moments of having those things. See, the truth is, so we need to have a talk. And here's the talk, and I could have had it at the start, but we would have been out of here way too early. So often I hear from people, they're too busy, they're too tired, they're too this, they're too that. And I want you to know I understand that. We live in a part of this country that is all of both those things and much more than that, right? But while that may be true, here's the thing you need to know. That every Saturday you attend a church, New Hope, and are served by people who are too busy and too tired. And here's the crazy thing. This church would not function without people serving. I mean, we would, but it would be a really bad situation, all right? Poor Pastor Marilyn would have like 60 plus kids all by herself. Now, you may like the moment of being away from those 60 kids, but she's not going to like it, right? Pastor Jason would be back there adjusting the sound, running up here to play, getting the lights on, running back there to change the slides so we could sing along with him. It would be crazy. And for those of you that serve already, I want you to know from me how much I appreciate it and how much our staff appreciate it. We recognize the amount of hours that people give at this place and also through this place is incredible. And most of those hours are done by people who are way too busy, who are too tired. But they know that in that moment, it's always a reminder that something or someone is more important. So what if? What if you answer the question? You need to answer this for yourself. And here's the question. And what if you move past you and what's in it for you and moved into what Jesus has done for you and wants to do through you? I hope you'll join me again next week because we have another talk to have. But let me pray as we wrap it up today, all right? Father, I am glad that you kept this story recorded for us to not only read today, but to reflect on today. And I'm so thankful that Jesus, you not only were, but you still are willing to do anything and everything, that nothing is beneath you, no one is beneath you. And that you are always about serving and healing and hope. And so I just ask you to help us to be embraced by your example, Jesus. And more importantly, maybe to have the courage to follow you in living out your kingdom wherever we find ourselves. That you would always remind us that we are not the most important person in this room. And we'll be thankful for that in your name. Amen.